August, so for July we'll be here. I don't know where we'll be in August.
We'll be here in August.
Oh, we'll be here in August.
Yeah, I say stay here until.
Please don't anyone else eat their raisins yet. Thank you for. So if your raisin is still skewered, or you can have it in your hand, either way, we will take it off the skewer soon, but you have never seen your raisin before. You have seen raisins, maybe, but I want you to imagine, you could imagine that you have just come from a place that doesn't have raisins and you don't know what this is. Or you could just say, I don't know what this raisin is. So the first sense I'd like you to engage, and we're going to just go at this in a leisurely pace, is to look at your raisin. Notice its colors, the pattern, size, where it's convex and concave. I'm going to take mine off the skewer so I can look at the other side too. Just marvel at this little piece of nature in your hand. Now I'd like you to use your sense of touch. Just feel the surface of the raisin. And use different parts of your skin, so you could use your thumb and your fingers. You could put it on your palm of your hand or against your cheek. To notice the different capacities that different parts of your body have for feeling the three-dimensionality. Maybe the stickiness. Hard or soft. Gotten a very dry one or a plumper one. You might feel what happens when you apply some pressure to it. And when your mind wanders away or starts judging me, just come back to the sensory experience of this raisin. Over and over again, come back to the raisin. I'd like you to engage your sense of smell. Bring the raisin up to one nostril and then the other nostril. Maybe a different amount of smell comes out from different sides. Maybe the smell evokes another memory. Smell stimulates the saliva in your mouth. Just notice what happens when you smell and what that smell is. Now I'd like you to listen to your raisin. Bring it up to your ear. And first just hold it there and see if it's talking to you or has any sound. And then kind of squish it between your fingers and see if there's any sound. My raisin bring it back to the palm of your hand. And think about where raisins come from. Come from grapes. They're planted. They need earth, sun, and water. Come to us because of the bounty of this natural world we live in. We live in a world where the way our bodies are and what the planet can provide work together to keep us alive. We can get sustenance. And there's yet another layer to the story of this raisin. How did it get into this room? I brought it here in my car. I bought it at Whole Foods. It wasn't grown in Colorado. Probably came from California in a truck. Burns fossil fuel, that employs people who drive trucks back and forth across the country. Trucks that we often get aggravated at, we're on I-70 or I-80 and we want to go and they don't go. If we go back to California, these raisins, when they were grapes, were picked by people. Historically by migrants from Mexico, documented and undocumented, paid well and not paid well, working in sanitary and mostly unsanitary conditions. We know in the past, and probably still some in the future, that children are working in the fields too young. Women are sexually assaulted in the fields. There's a lot of the world in this little raisin. So with some appreciation for its complexity outside of our bodies, I'm going to invite you to put it in your mouth, but not start chewing. Just place it on your tongue. And roll it around and see how it feels inside your mouth. What sensory capacities does your tongue have for just feeling texture? The roof of your mouth. Do you get any flavor? Just by having it sit there. Now, ever so slowly begin the process of how you chew. Don't be in a hurry to get it down. You've only got this one raisin to tide you over. Notice what side of your mouth you chew on. Notice the motion of your teeth and what's your tongue do when you're chewing the raisin. Notice that burst of sweet that comes. Keep it in your mouth long enough to notice the transition from sweet to something else. Notice if you can feel it sliding down your throat. just when you lose track of it. When you're done, notice if you're one raisin fuller. What did you notice?
That some senses are stronger for me than others,
Some senses are stronger than
and taste in particular, like taste and smell seem to bring up memories.
others. Taste and smell bring up memories. Very evocative. Marcel Proust wrote thousands of pages about that famous little French cookie, the Madeleine. What else did you notice?
But it tasted so much better than when you just kind of eat it quickly and mindlessly. You really notice the taste. Wow.
When did raisins get, how did they make raisins so good? Tastes different when you eat it slowly. Yes?
I was anxious. When is she gonna move on to the next sentence?
When can I eat?
When can I eat this single raisin?
What is up with this woman? So an interesting thing to notice. And then to think about how you relate it to your anxiety. Was it like, you know, what does that feel like? Yeah,
I just made myself breathe.
there you go.
Yes, if I can't eat, I gotta breathe.
I found my attitude changing when you started, when your description started getting more negative in terms of the children that are out in the field having to do this, that children people getting assaulted in the field. But my attitude toward the raisin changing.
Yeah. It's a complex thing, this raisin. And you know, that's, I guess in my experience, I would say that's true of everything. It is both beautiful and wonderful, and maybe not so beautiful and wonderful. There's, you know, it's very hard to have pure joy or pure negativity. And how do we relate to the complexity of the interrelationship of sadness and joy? John Kabat-Zinn, who is the source of that diagram, calls it the full catastrophe of living. You know, it's full, it's rich, it's life and death. You know, it's good, it's, you know, honor and dishonor. It isn't always one thing or the other. Something else you noticed? Charlotte?
If we brought this full, you know, the train of all the way back to the field workers who picked the grape and the people who planted the vines and the cedar, I mean, talk about mindful eating. Now, you know, I'm familiar with the concept of mindful eating, but do I often, the salad, think about who picked my lettuce and who planted the seed and who, wow. Yeah, it's kind of a comeback to the idea of what it means to really be fully with what we're eating and how we're eating it.
And how interconnected we are,
Truly.
you know, in this very profound way. And so there's no way we're alone. Even when we're in solitude, we're not really alone. We are part of this web. I originally trained as an economist, and in that world we talk about the division of labor. So this idea is very easy for me, but it's a wonderful thing, the division of labor. But it's really, it changes our relationship to the world to be reminded of it and to think about it and to realize that the lives we live depend on the lives that other people live. And what does that do to how we make choices about where we shop and what we buy and what we put in our mouths? So there's this full sensory awareness that brings me into the now, and then this moral and ethical awareness that brings me into a more complex place. Both of those are part of mindfulness. Yes?
I thought of it the raisins' cousins. And the cousins are vineyards that become wine.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, she's not mentioning wine in this group, and I wonder if it's because, we drink redemption. And I took it another level, and I thought, oh no, I'm not being mindful.
No, it's like, oh, thinking. Let me come back to the raisins. I noticed I'm thinking, oh, she said that's mindfulness. Now I'm going to come back.
Seems like too much.
No. I've never seen the exercise done with going to the cousins because it takes you out of the immediacy. I mean, but the same exercise could be done with a glass of wine, in a different setting than this. Carla mentioned doing it with chocolate. You can do it with any piece of food. You tell the social story is a little different, and the sensory experience, of course, is different. So there are raisin moments every day and every hour of your life. Something that you could look at more closely, be curious about, appreciate, be grateful for, savor the beauty of. You would be hard-pressed to walk through this building and not find something that was more interesting than you first thought if you just attended to it. And in that way, mindfulness is something you can do throughout your day if you remember. And you can even set a little timer. Use that technology to help us with mindfulness. If you remember to step out of the swirl that is us and just look at the world. And nature almost always affords something infinitely beautiful. But the creations of civilization are a marvel too. There's water flowing in the pipes. What does water feel like? What does water look like? Where does water come from? So that attitude of mind. Thank you very much for your participation and kind attention. And if you have any questions, I'm staying afterwards. I have business cards. I can get you more pause cards. It was a pleasure being with you this morning.
Yes, thank you, Rona. Excuse me. It is a small token of our appreciation.
Oh, thank you.
EAPA mugs. Please, yes, do feel free to hang around and speak with her. We'll see you again second Friday next month. I don't remember which.
11. What causes stress? Parenting. Am I doing it right? Am I making mistakes? I'm not perfect. Work. Too much to do. Unfinished projects. Mistakes. Am I professional? Do people take me seriously? Life. Lots of shoulds. What's the toll? Shutting down. Not being present. Escaping. Lack of sleep. Pain in muscles. Lack of enjoyment. What stresses me out? My thoughts about finances and how it impacts multiple areas of my life, day-to-day activities, future dreams, my children's future, retirement. How it shows up: inconsideration with my spouse, short, harsh, agitation, lack of sleep, sleep interruption. I'll just do a couple more. My job stresses me out. And it shows up in sleep, self-esteem, presence, quality of work. I'm assuming it's the lack of some of those. Feeling overwhelmed with lots of to-dos, people needing my attention and time, concern I'm not managing as well as I should. It affects sleep, awake in the wee hours, worrying about what I'm not getting done. I used to say that in my school we could have had a meeting at 2 o'clock in the morning since we were all up. I'll just read one more. Financial insecurity. And the way it shows up: I'm short-tempered, anxious, not creative. I isolate and don't engage with others. Pretty serious stuff. And everyone had something to say. It's epidemic in our society. And Oh, I didn't use the microphone, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I'm sorry to the folks on the phone. We know a lot about stress. I mean, we know what it is physiologically. Physiologically, and I gave you a diagram of the stress cycle. But stress is, when the technical thing of stress, and I know all of you know this, is when our body goes into its fight, flight, or freeze mode. When we stimulate the adrenals and we start the flow of cortisol and adrenaline through our body. And it is an incredibly useful function. We wouldn't be here as a species without that cycle. It is based on vigilance. You know, we're scanning the environment constantly, and when we lived with lions and tigers and bears and with at the just edge of survival, constantly looking for what's a danger, and then being able to respond quickly and unconsciously. So we make a decision that something's a threat. It's a nanosecond, and our body kicks in, and the adrenaline flows, and the blood flows differently, and the heart starts racing, and the lungs start pounding. The heart pounds, and pardon me. And we're ready to fight or flee, or sometimes we freeze. But still, we're pounding while we're standing there frozen. So that's kept us alive. But the reality is that in our modern day society, we are in continual stress. Our vigilance is not just about physical danger. It's about emotional danger. Am I perfect? Am I doing it right? Do people like me? It's about financial insecurity. Such a big issue in our society, always, and even more so affecting more people than ever before. And we scan the environment, and we see things that we perceive as dangers. Either they're real dangers to our life, or we perceive them as dangers to our life. And then our body is in this state. And depending on your job, you may be stimulating and triggering your body hour after hour after hour. Another ping on the email, another buzz on your cell phone, another thing you have to do. Now, the interesting thing about stress is a lot of it is the perceptions we have. We perceive, we make a judgment that this is a danger to ourselves. What we know when we think about those kinds of things is, one, we don't always perceive the world accurately. And two, we are always interpreting the world. And three, some of the things that mean a great deal to us are not literally matters of physical survival, but they are matters of ego survival. We're always on the lookout for somebody who maybe doesn't like us. And as therapists, you know how deep those issues are. Am I good enough? Am I loved? Am I perfect enough? So what's the toll on our bodies? The science is in, and it's definitive. And every day, more and more studies. Stress is literally killing us. The overstimulation of this system compromises our immune system profoundly. And there's a new syndrome that's been identified, toxic stress. If you are familiar with that, raise your hand. So not very many of you. So it's been identified as a syndrome, if that's the right word, for children in poverty. And they've identified 10 or 12 life circumstances: being exposed to domestic violence, alcoholism in the home, food uncertainty, shelter uncertainty, violence in the streets. There's a list of these 12 factors. And if young children are exposed to 3 of them, their life trajectory is deeply affected. They will, it's now correlation, but they're understanding causality more. Greater obesity, compromised cardiovascular systems, lower life expectancy. And there's this clear relationship between, truly for young children, these are for them it is life-threatening in some deep way. So there's toxic stress, which is the extreme, but what most of us in this room are experiencing is chronic stress. And it's really important to understand how dangerous it is to us. And there are ways, I mean, and then we have to decide, what are we going to do? And sometimes we live lives that we don't have a lot of control over. But something we do have control over is how we relate to what's going on in our life. And sometimes we can find ways to insert some self-care that can be an antidote to the stress. So going back to that opening activity of those 3 deep belly breaths, probably by itself it isn't going to make an enormous difference, but on a daily basis, if every time you went to the restroom or every time before you hit the send button, you took a deep breath and you engaged the parasympathetic nervous system, which allows your body to downregulate just a little before the next. But it's the stutter forward all the time, and there's no downtime. And probably the most common theme in there of what the effect is no sleep. So the one thing that nature has given us to restore ourselves, sleep, is deeply compromised. This is a gloomy picture. I can see it on your faces, and I know it. It's very disturbing. And you add technology to it. I was talking to a couple of people before. I have to be connected all the time. I have to know about every new demand. I have to know. So that has added yet a new layer and a whole generation of young people. My daughter's 23. When she was a teen, there wasn't yet this much connectivity. So she got to grow up a little bit without feeling like she was attached to her cell phone. A colleague of mine surveyed, informally and now formally surveys college students. They literally sleep with it. This is college students, so it's not population. They sleep with their cell phone next to their ears in case someone texts them, because the social norm is you have to respond. Now, it's just a social norm. But if you're a teenager or a young college student, the last thing in the world you want to do is say, I don't want to play that game, you know? So people are literally addicted to that. So, where is the pause? Where is the rest? Where is the counterbalance? So mindfulness practices offers a set of ways, tools, practices that you can infuse into your life to find some space and to invest in some quiet. So there's the little practices that what I'm teaching you today are little things that you can do during the day. At the deeper level, you commit, as Carla did or does, and a few other people raise their hand, to a regular practice where you invest and put money in being quiet and just being and not doing and giving yourself the gift of some space. Because the rest of your day is going to be pretty demanding. But if we never invest in ourselves, and as people in the helping profession, we are the most guilty. Do we ever put on our oxygen masks first? No, we don't. We're such good people. We care about everybody else. I had a conversation with someone who does physical fitness programs. He was working for the Douglas County School District and trying to get people to exercise more. And he had a whole bunch of things, lots of ways to encourage people to exercise. And we were just having a conversation, and he had also worked in the healthcare field. And he said it's a badge of honor among nurses and nurses' aides to not be healthy, to be overweight, to not exercise, because that's a physical proof that they care more about their clients than they do about themselves. It's their badge of honor in the world to be unhealthy. This is not good. We can't keep giving because we will kill ourselves. We will compromise our ability to stay in the game. We will burn out. The average teacher tenure is 3 years. It's not because they're let go. Actually, it's 5 years. No, It's not because they're fired, it's because they do it and then they can't do it anymore. Just as they're reaching the point where their skills are good enough to actually be effective in the classroom, they leave because it's a choice, it becomes a survival choice. So, questions or comments about that? I'm going to do one more exercise. We have time for the Q&A exercise.
I just want to, something I noticed. My brother-in-law is very, very ill, and he's even needing palliative care. And I noticed that my sister-in-law doesn't stop all day. And she's the kind of person who's a caretaker type, and she's doing something all the time. And I keep saying, what are you doing to take care of you? What are you doing? She knows all those things. It's just that it's just kind of like inborn. And I get worried sometimes. She's going to pass away before he does.
Yes, I mean, and the feeling is I have to. I'm a good person. I won't be a good person if I take care of myself. In my family, the way we do this is we give and we give. The person who's sick gets taken care of. I mean, there are a lot of deep stories here. But the fact is, the only, and with those deep stories, rational arguments don't work often, as you folks know very well. But you're not going to be there to take care of him if you don't take care of yourself. You're not going to be there to take care of your children if you don't take care of yourself. And usually it takes a crisis. People often come to mindfulness practices when their marriage has fallen apart. I'm raising my hand for the folks on the phone. When they get sick, when they have a nervous breakdown, when they start drinking too much or taking too many drugs. And that may be the path. But there's also, what we're trying to do with mindfulness in schools is introduce this as a prevention measure rather than a crisis intervention measure. Anything else anyone wants to say or share? Yes.
You just mentioned schools. I was wondering whether or not you had anything further about the schools. I think it was in the Northwest that started doing the 3 minutes of silence per class period or per day, and whether or not that had an effect on school students yet. Are there any studies about that?
There are
yet, or
various
no?
studies about, I mean, it's a new field in terms
Right.
of research. All the indications are positive.
Right.
Are things definitive? No. But when you talk to teachers, I've worked in Boulder in projects where we've brought mindfulness to teachers. We've helped them have their own practice and then bring it to the kids. The quality, their subjective experience of the quality of their life is that life is a lot better. You know, the definitive, is this going to raise test scores? You know, all that research isn't in. People see different patterns of discipline behaviors when we give kids skills to self-regulate. And the kids get very excited when they now have something they can do for themselves, when they can go in the peace corner and belly breathe and calm themselves down. You know, we give them lessons, stop, think, and, you know, problem solve. But when you're in the middle of being upset and you're 5 years old, you can't actually think and problem solve. You can't actually think and problem solve if you're 60, if you're in the middle of being deeply upset. So giving kids tools where they can, and it's mostly about the breath, down-regulate and calm down and let the nervous system settle down, and then let as much prefrontal cortex as the little ones have, let that kick in and let them solve problems after they've calmed themselves down. And the sense of power they feel when they can do it for themselves. Not all of them can. So it's very rewarding.
Are you familiar with FREA? It's an international foundation with a mission to teach mindfulness in the schools.
I don't know that one in particular, but I'm going to write that down. BREA?
FREA.
Taking my pencil out right now.
They're doing wonderful things in some of the countries in South America.
Yeah, And I have some colleagues in Columbia who are doing something there too.
You're actually teaching this stuff to kids.
So let's do a little more practice. And then at the end, we'll have time for some Q&A. So now we're going to do some sensory awareness stuff. Oh no. Ah! My vigilance just went off, and I like my adrenaline. Catch that microphone before it falls. So these are raisins skewered by toothpicks. Please take one and pass. How many of you have ever done the raisin exercise?
Or chocolate.
Or chocolate? Not too many, good. Pass those around. You only need one. If you're on the phone and you get a piece of food in front of you, a small piece, that would be good. So while we're doing that, I'm going to put up two definitions of stress. One from Richard Lazarus, a particular relationship between the person and the environment that is appraised by the person as taxing or exceeding his or her resources and endangering his or her well-being. And the crucial word in there is that you appraise it that way. And then how do you relate to it? And this is, I like this one too. And these are in your handouts, thank you. Stress is caused by being here, but wanting to be there. So I've just begun to notice that my most stressful pattern is I'm making breakfast, I'm making healthy food for myself, I'm not eating junk food, and I'm thinking I'm late, and I'm not allowed to be late, that's my family pattern, and now I want to hurry. So I don't know that I actually cut the food faster or chop it faster, but my shoulders tense up and my neck tenses up, and I'm already trying to be at the next thing or at the table eating. And it's like, Rona, you just stand here and cut the damn berries, you know? Like, just be here now with the berries, and then you'll eat them, and then you'll go to your meeting. But I'm always wanting, you know, it's like I'm getting through it, and I'm becoming more and more aware of how much that becomes the muscle, and I can feel it in my body. So being here but wanting to be there. Can we just sometimes, not all the time, give ourselves permission to be here? So now we're going to be here with raisins. Everyone have a raisin? Okay.
I'm sorry, I ate mine.
Oh my God!
Kirsten was her secretary emailed me. It was a very dirty house. Decided our computers and phones were down. So I'm thinking, great. So
not that dirty. But he's more natural. So it makes me feel better to more so than I normally do.
I call it a graceful day, but I know there's a ton I could do. My desk is piled high, but if I feel I don't want to do that, because I don't have my journals, I really should clear off my desk, because this is my opportunity, so I'm trying to recover in that place.
Being able to fully absorb
I would work on my desk today and with clients that I may not be able to charge. So I can do a lot about work, but I wasn't too bad until I got the text. And I was telling Rona the service that I don't have anything on my phone. No, I don't live by my phone. And then I checked this. Kirsten, I did see the text come through.
So I'm afraid I can't accommodate.
No, we accommodated ourselves.
Thank you. So I'd like you to, thank you,
Not to be
Parker.
able to say something.
And now I'd like us to reflect a little bit on that experience. So each of you had both experiences of listening and speaking. So first put on your hat of what was it like to listen in this way? And what did you notice? Not whether you liked doing it or not liked doing it, but what was it like? What was the experience like of listening in this way, and then also this other part of dropping, noticing and then dropping internal commentary?
Knowing that I didn't have to respond, I didn't have to think about a response.
How did that feel to you?
Well, then I was completely able to listen to her.
Yeah.
So not having to respond, you could be more present for her.
Yeah.
Yes?
Knowing that I couldn't respond actually made me anxious.
Yeah.
We both wanted to ask questions.
Yes, that's what we do, and you might do it professionally, so it's, yes, so where did you notice where the anxiety showed up in your body?
At the top of my body, I was starting to tense.
Yes.
I noticed that when I'm listening, I'm not very in tune with my body, and as I was listening to her, I was remembering the exercise and going, okay, what's going on here? Because I hadn't really paid attention.
So sometimes we're not paying attention to what's going on inside of us. I'm repeating some of these things for the benefit of, I'm sorry to the people in Idaho and elsewhere that not repeating everything. Thank you.
Well, as a therapist, we're used to demonstrating our empathy and our listening by nodding our heads and making certain gestures and sounds to all of them. I felt like I wasn't demonstrating enough empathy.
Not being able to be too demonstrative felt like you weren't demonstrative at all. Other comments on being a listener?
Just as Lisa said, I felt like I, had to hold my head straight to not nod.
I gave you permission to nod a little bit. I just said, don't, if you're.
And I felt like a bobblehead. I mean, because I couldn't say anything, I just felt like I kept constantly acknowledging.
So it's not our normal social convention. So, yes, you have another comment.
Because we didn't have to respond, I think I noticed more emotion just on her face rather than just emotion.
So you noticed more emotion on her face because you didn't have to, like this gentleman here, you didn't have to come up with something to say. You were just there. You were paying attention more.
Part of who we are as counselors is that we're always listening to what they're saying and trying to figure out what the meaning is behind it and what you're going to ask to get more from them. And it just really goes against the grain to sit there and just listen.
Yeah, so it's not what counselors do. On the other hand, so as a principal, I have certain occupational hazards. I want to tell everyone to behave. So as a counselor, there's an occupational habit. It's a risk that you're that kind of, that you're always thinking that way as instead of just listening to the story. So put on your other hat. You were the speaker. So now you have the other experience. What was it? You had both experiences. What was it like to speak into this space of not getting response back?
I felt a little rude, like I was talking for so long and she didn't get to say anything, And I was just
never
waiting.
Be selfish. It's not allowed.
Yeah, I was just waiting for that bell to chime. It's like, stop.
Yeah, it's not. I'm taking up too much time. I'm rude.
Well, I actually said maybe 2 sentences and then was silent the remainder of the time. I couldn't think of anything to say. And I wasn't going to just force myself to say something.
Good for you.
So I just sat there.
So actually, I didn't give that instruction, but that actually in this formal practice, that is the instruction, which is to not fill the time up, but to just let it be. Sometimes something new might arise, and sometimes it might not, and it's okay either way. Other comments on being a listener? Yes, in fact.
I felt like I was just blurting things out instead of organizing my thoughts. So that was different.
Yeah. Instead of planning, we were just speaking in the moment. So extemporaneously, yes.
I felt like Maureen too. It was like, okay, I'm just kind of talking, and I don't know if she's interested or not. What's going on here? And I had great eye contact then.
So you weren't sure it made any, there was of any value to do that. Your partner was bored. Yes.
I was interested. The eye contact was much easier as a listener than as the talker for me. I was really conscious of that.
Easier to make eye contact as a listener,
As a
yeah.
listener.
And sometimes when I speak, I know I often do this thing of my eyes go up, because that's how I sort of think and organize. There's something in the brain about that your eyes go up. Any other comments about it?
I was thinking about a friend of ours who has mastered the skill of talking without receiving any kind of feedback. When my wife's talking to her on the phone quite often, I'll say, "Are you still talking to Tony?" And she says, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, I hadn't heard you say a word in 10 minutes. So there are people who don't have to have that kind of feedback.
Right. And as a counselor, I'm sure you have thoughts about that. So it's an unusual thing to do, but you know, and did anyone find anything in it that was intriguing? There's a lot of discomfort. Anything intriguing or new? There was this part about, well, I could just listen if I didn't have to think about what I was going to say.
Well, I think it's really freeing to listen this way, because you really don't have to, like Raider, you were talking about, you know, okay, where do we go, or, ooh, that was interesting, let's explore that a little bit. It's really freeing in the sense that you're allowing that person to go where they are going, which I think is part of what we all do, but, you know, but it did take our part of it out of, you know, our wisdom and sharing that and all, but it's freeing because you can really go with the person and let them take you where they need to go instead of us, because you always, with any kind of intervention, whatever it is, just a, or you change the direction of the conversation somehow, so. That's
So it
what
doesn't, as when you listen in that way, it liberates the other person. So sometimes these practices are used, the place I first met it was in diversity work, and working on social justice and equity issues, which can be very emotional. And it can be used in this formality as a way to give people the space to just process their emotions. You know, you're not the therapist, but it's just, that was really upsetting, I didn't know what happened, I felt really bad, or that made me remember. And you know, it's a little stream of consciousness. And people can be constructing their story. You know, it's not planned, as your partner said. It's like, I'm not trying to present something sensible, I'm just pulling up what is actually happening with me in the moment. But it is not our normal convention. So I invite you, and it also, in giving people our attention, and sometimes maybe we don't want to be the speaker so much, but it is interesting to think why we don't want to take that time and have our place, you know, and have people listen to us, and yet you all professionally spend your time listening to other people. So those of us in the helping professions sometimes we help a lot. Maybe we sometimes help too much? But when we're not in the strictly therapeutic world, when we do this with teachers, the reaction they often have is, wow, if I ever just did this with my kids and gave them my undivided attention for even a short amount of time, what would that be like for them? Or if I just listened to my daughter, there's an interesting idea, or my son, and didn't try to think, what's the parental thing to say? What advice should I give them? Oh no, they're not going to graduate from college, you know, they're 3 years old. You know, could I just listen? So it's an invitation to explore. We call it interpersonal mindfulness. You know, you don't have to do it with such rigidity, but to explore what's it like to just listen and then respond. You know, take in what they're saying, notice your commentary, notice your judgment, drop it when you find it, not plan what you're going to say, wait till they're done, and sometimes it takes a long time. I wouldn't necessarily do it with your wife's friend. She clearly, you know, has an issue. But then respond when that person is finished. And it's very hard to do. It's very hard to do, but it does change some social dynamics. So, what I'd like to do now, I don't know how many of you came here today thinking that this was for you, or thinking, oh, this is something I'm going to use with my clients, or I should think about whether I'm going to use this with my clients. And probably you're all aware that in the field of mental health, There is a very strong movement for mindfulness-based cognitive behavioral therapy, and as I had chatted with someone earlier, I was told, which makes sense to me, that CBT is a kind of the dominant mode of EAP interventions, because I won't tell you why, you know why, and I probably only know a tiny bit why. But in England, mindfulness-based cognitive behavioral therapy is the treatment of choice for chronic depression. And the research base on NBCBT is growing and growing and growing. But this isn't a training in how to bring this to your clients. This is really for you. So I'm now going to ask you to engage in a little self-reflection. This is going to be an anonymous activity. I'm going to, if we pass these pieces of paper around, I'll ask some of you, you're always right in my line of sight there. The questions I'm going to ask you, I'm going to ask you to answer as honestly as you can, and it's going to be turned into me, but I do not know your handwriting, and I do not, we will not put your name on it, and I'm going to read a couple of things out loud. So as you write, be sure that you don't put in any details that are identifying, because that's not the point. The point of this, well, I won't tell you the point of the activity. We'll do the activity and then we'll talk about it.
Oh, we have plenty.
There should be enough. So when you turn them in, we're going to fold them over, I'll collect them, and then I'll read a few randomly chosen ones. So we're turning now to stress. Anyone have any stress in their life? So I want you to actually take a few moments to write down what stresses you out. Something you may not have told anyone else this. You may not have even admitted to yourself. So this is an opportunity not to give, to dig a little, to feel in a little deeper. What really stresses me out in my life? Sort of the top half of the page or the bottom half of the page, and it can be both sides, it doesn't matter. The second question is, then how does stress show up in your life? And with a particular emphasis on what toll does stress take on you and your family? So what stresses you and what's the toll? I'm going to write that on the board, the white chart. Don't feel, those of you who are taking more time, please take more time. This is not meant to stress you out. another 20 seconds or so? That was 3 minutes.
Yes.
I know, right?
See if the computer's working.
Oh, that was just like,
Okay, so
especially your phone. Oh, we're not supposed to talk about it again.
Oh, yeah, it's touching out now. I'm just
let's
playing
see
the game.
what my experience as a school leader is that school leaders feel like they're never allowed to admit how hard their job is. And we came up with the idea of asking people to write in this anonymous fashion because sometimes we feel like we're not allowed to be stressed out because we're the leader or the helper. And it's a way of sort of finding out a little bit more about what's going on and to find out if you're alone or not alone. So I'm just going to read a few. My computer, too many things to do. Don't ever feel finished. As I am aging, my body feeling out of control. Making sure I have spent time arranging to do the things I love, not remembering. It shows up as pain in my body everywhere. Worse in the neck and shoulders. That's where I carry tension. Not believing in me is what really stresses me out. Not trusting my gifts and talents. Feeling how it shows up, feeling rushed and insecure, tired all the time. We did that, or I didn't like the yogurt. Why did they get that kind of yogurt? Why oranges aren't in season now? Why didn't they bring berries? The water isn't hot enough. We spend a lot of our time assessing whether a situation is good or bad. We want more of it, we want less of it. It's done well or it's done poorly. We want it, we don't want it. And that is a human quality, and it is a useful quality. Judging what's safe and what's not safe, what is appropriate practice in implementing client care and what's not appropriate practice, when students know something and when they don't know something. It's crucial that we make judgments, and we can get carried away with it. And sometimes making judgments about things that we can't change makes us suffer, because something is happening and it can't be different, and we hate it, and we spend a lot of time hating it. So mindfulness is cultivating our capacity to look at our experience in the moment, and in that moment, just notice what it is, how it is, what qualities it has, but not whether we want it or don't want it, or like it or don't like it, or think it's good or think it's bad. So it's a different way of being. It's not if you do that, you don't do this other thing. It's a both and, not an either or. So last night I was teaching a class with teachers in Boulder Valley School District in the summer. It was very nice. They're not so stressed in the summer in our stress reduction class. And we did a first longish meditation practice. And I asked people what they noticed, and somebody talked about pain. Pain is a pretty common human phenomenon. These are very fragile bodies we live in, let alone emotional pain. Between the two kinds of pain, not one of us gets out of this life without experiencing that, and some have more and some have less. There's nothing very likable about pain. If we had a choice, we wouldn't have it. But if we have it, what is our relationship to it? Do we hate it? Do we fight it? Do we tense around it? Do we add another level of suffering to what is already a difficult situation? And so the quality of suspending judgment and accepting what is in the moment is a way of taking off that secondary layer of pain. I'm anxious and I hate being anxious. That doesn't make me any less anxious. Anxiety is my middle name. I'm Myrna Walensky and I'm an anxious person. When you don't fall asleep in the middle of the night, how many, now come on, honestly, how many people, I'm not sleeping, I have to sleep. I'm not sleeping, I have to sleep. It has never helped me fall asleep to think about how I have to sleep. What would it be like to just be with the insomnia? It's not easy. I work on this practice all the time, but it is a different relationship to the insomnia, to be with it rather than to judge it. So does this mean we accept everything in life and we don't try to get better and we don't take pills that will cure us and we don't try to fix social problems and we don't try to help people? No. It's in the moment. Can we be curious about what it is we are experiencing and remove the judgment, which is pretty emotionally laden? I want it, I don't want it. I like it, I don't like it. Pretty activating thoughts, whether you want more or you want less. If we practice trying to remove that layer, we might get some more clarity about what the thing we're noticing is, and it might become obvious to us what we need to do about it. So this is not an invitation to, it's always going to be like this and this is it. But sometimes if certain kinds of chronic pain might always be there. What's your relationship going to be to that? To add more suffering to it or to not? Or to relax enough around it to realize, wow, when I do this, it is less, which is now some information that might help you work with it. So the invitation is to be curious rather than judgmental. So now here's a fun fill-up on it. I'm being judgmental. Now you start beating yourself up for being judgmental. This is not a good thing. So if you're judgmental, we notice being judgmental. Because the last piece, with kindness and with humor and with gentleness. So everything I talk about in terms of what mindfulness is as a practice is on one level simple, but it is never easy. And we're human, and we will always be human, and our minds will always race, and we will always make judgments because it's helpful to make judgments. And so we will find ourselves not always being mindful. And that's an opportunity to be curious about that, to smile at ourselves, and to say, let me try that again. Even noticing that you're judgmental, here's the good news. Noticing that you are being judgmental is mindfulness in action. Because now you're not in your judgment, you have noticed your judgment. And now it doesn't hold you and capture you. It's just interesting. Wow. Okay, let me step back and not be judgmental about that person. Oh, let me look at them differently. Now I can do that because I let myself be gentle about it. Any questions or comments at this point? We're going to do some more of this.
It's just I like the idea of the gentleness and the humor, and so often I take it so seriously, like I'm being judgmental and I shouldn't, but just the humor in, oh, I'm noticing it's doing it, and even calling myself it can be quite helpful.
Sometimes I notice I'm doing that again. So one of the images that some people use is, think about training a puppy. You know, we don't beat up on puppies when, well, people in this room don't beat up on puppies when they pee and poop in the wrong places, or they don't do it, they're up on the furniture again. You know, we do it over and over and over and over again. And you know, horse whispering and dog whispering and all the new sort of modalities of animal training encourage us to do that with some degree of firmness, but also with gentleness and love. So can we be compassionate to ourselves as we are trying to cultivate these qualities that we have? And if there's one quality that perhaps will serve us most of all in our lives, it is some self-compassion. When we're not perfect. Yeah. I'm sure you see it all the time. I'm not. Fear is pretty powerful in life, but the fear of not being loved and not being perfect is a pretty powerful force in, at least in Western society. It seems to be a pretty big theme. So let me share some other definitions. This is that may resonate. Knowing what you're doing when you're doing it. How many people have been in the shower and wondered if they did wash their hair or not? I hate that. It's like, really? I don't know. I'm 62 years old. I washed my hair in the shower or not. It doesn't seem all that interesting, but really I could have noticed if I washed my hair. Paying attention to what is happening while it is happening. It's another way of saying the same thing, but sometimes different words or different phrasing will capture it. And synchronizing mind and body in the only time the body knows, which is now. So a lot of what we do when we teach mindfulness is encourage people to be returning over and over and over again to physical and sensory sensations. Because there's no possibility of being, your nose doesn't plan for the next smell. Your eyes aren't, they may be scanning out into the distance, but they're only seeing what's there now. Our bodies, if we can bring our minds back into our bodies and the sensations in our bodies and our senses, that is our most powerful tool to get ourselves into the present. So I wanted, we had one comment. I just want to see if there's anything else that anyone wants to say or ask about at this point before we do another practice. Okay. So I want to check here because I have some various things I can do. So I don't want to do something that everyone knows too well to find interesting or informative. Are people familiar, how many of you in the room are actual therapists? So let me just check in with you. I was thinking of doing an activity that was about mindful listening and speaking. Do it?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'd like you to find one partner. So I know we had a bunch of trios before, but let's see if we can really pair up and pull yourself just so you have a little bit of, you're not listening to the other conversation. So if you take your time and you take a moment and find.
Hello again.
It's cold in here. It's freezing. Yeah, I don't think. I'm noticing it's cold.
So this is a protocol that has instructions. So I could, okay, you guys will be okay. You're fine. So we'll make sure it's timed. So we'll give you a little extra time. I have to get my timer out. Sorry. So I apologize. So mindful listening and speaking is a practice, and as those of you who are therapists, you'll be familiar. It is not the natural way we have interactions all the time, but by bringing attention to how we listen and speak, it can influence how we interact in more natural situations. So I invite you to be with the formality of this, And even notice how you feel about the formality of it, because that's part of the practice. So we pause like we did before. We just sort of take a moment to tune in to what's going on internally. That quick scan, how's, do I hurt? How am I feeling? What's my mind like? And then, especially when we're a listener, we're going to have checked in with ourselves and turned outward. And as we're cultivating the capacity to both be attentive to what's arising in ourselves and fully open to what the other person is saying. And you'll see more about what the trust of what arises means. So if you're speaking, and one of you will speak first and then the other will speak, but when you're speaking, don't decide in advance what you're going to say. Not easy. Just take that pause and speak just whatever comes up. Because no one will know if you had a better story to tell, because they will never know that other story. So whatever you say is just fine. And when you're listening, so this is especially important if you're the second speaker. First person is speaking and you're listening, but now you're going to speak next, but part of you is thinking, ooh, what am I going to say? When you notice that, say, oh, I'm planning. And you be very kindly and gently say, let's listen. The other thing that if you're listening, you might notice you're doing is you're agreeing or disagreeing. You're trying to, convince, you're getting ready. This is not going to be a dialogue. This is just going to be an alternating speaking. You're judging. You have a story that reminds you of. So you notice what comes up when you're listening that distracts you from just giving this other person your undivided attention. And listen as if, because it's really true, how you listen to this person will affect what they say to you. So we don't speak while we're listening. You don't have to keep a complete, flat affect and no face, but not a lot of, So if you're encouraging them, encourage them quietly from your heart and your eyes, maybe a little smile, a little nod, but not a big demonstrative, I know what you're talking about. Okay? So are these instructions kind of clear? So the person with the shortest hair in your group is going to go first. Deb may have to take her hair down. Or truth in advertising. And the prompt here, this is not overly confidential, but this is not a deep probe into your inner being, but you might go deeper than you think. But it's still, we don't talk about it afterwards. It's called double confidentiality. You don't tell somebody else what your partner said, and you don't even come up to your partner afterwards and ask them about it. There can be other rules for interaction, but... So, the prompt is, what did you have to leave behind in order to come to this meeting? I bet there's stuff on your desk. So it's just a little, what did you have to leave behind? It could be anything. And I'm going to start the timer. I'll use the chime to begin us and end the first person, and then we'll re-pause, and the second person will speak. So please.
Actually, I didn't the Go back to but yeah, because I just her. And then also we should go back to Jason. I did have to choose CJ. should be talking to her about what I
Finish your sentence. And now the next person, within the 2 minutes, can engage in the getting ready. And again, the prompt is, what did you have to leave behind? I just want to say a little bit of my background so I'm not a complete stranger to you. And then I thought we'd begin by doing some practices before we begin by talking about things. So we're going to alternate between talking and doing. I was a principal in Boulder Valley School District for 17 years, up until 2009. And since then, I have been working in the world of mindfulness in education. And we'll talk a lot more about what mindfulness is and mindfulness. Should I step back?
No, you're fine. I'm just going to take this down.
Static.
Yeah.
Oh, Chris said I didn't have to use them.
Yes.
As long as you can get into there.
Everybody always complains
I know.
when we don't use the mic.
Okay.
What's a person to do?
Let's do the microphone.
All right.
I apologize for misleading.
Okay. So, could I get some assistance?
Oh.
You see the mute bar? I was looking for a light.
Yeah, I did earlier. There we go.
I was hoping the light wouldn't turn on. So,
There.
nice and loud. So then I can sit down so I don't have to project quite so much. So when I left being a principal, I decided to pursue my interest in mindfulness and bringing it together with education. And I currently work for an organization, PassageWorks Institute, that is, our mission in the world is to help teachers cultivate their social and emotional intelligence so that they can create more relationship-based classrooms and create communities of learners so that it's a more welcoming environment for students. And for the last year, we've had a mindfulness program that we offer to educators, and my job is to develop that and grow that field. So if you are interested more about any of PassageWorks, you can talk to me later, but I'd like to actually begin by doing a little bit of a basic mindfulness practice. So I would invite you to I also invite you to turn off your cell phones if you're connected and put them away if you can. And to put your food down for the moment and your drinks down for the moment. These are all invitations. You can choose not to participate in any activity I'm leading you in. And if you would put both feet on the floor and just settle into your chair in any way that's comfortable for you, besides just having your feet flat on the floor. And you can have your eyes open or closed. If they're open, have them gazing downward. And just begin to feel yourself sitting. feel your body on the chair and your feet on the floor. Just begin to notice that you came in with a body and you're sitting with a body. And allow yourself to settle. And let the chair support you, the floor under the chair. To know that most of the time we can count on the earth and gravity to keep us from floating off into space. And now if you would take 3 deep breaths into your belly, filling your belly first and then filling your upper chest slowly and deeply. And when you exhale, exhaling from the chest first and then letting the air out of the belly. Of course, we don't actually breathe through our lungs, but there's an expansion of our belly, and we want the breath to get as deep into our body as possible. Just 3 deep breaths at your own pace. And then allow yourself to return to normal breathing. Using your internal awareness capacity to notice. Just see if there's a part of your body that's calling out, aches, it's itchy. Just a quick scan of the body to see what's there. Turn your attention to your mind. And notice not what you are thinking, but the quality of how your mind is working. Maybe in this moment or maybe in the last moment. Do you feel groggy or clear? Do you feel fast or slow? Is your mind pinging from point to point, or is there one thing that it's focused on? Just to become aware of what's happening in your mind. And lastly, I would invite you to notice whether there are any emotions present. I'm in a room of people who work with emotions. And if there is some emotion, notice where in your body you feel that emotion. I'm going to sound a chime, and you just listen to the chime until the sound fades away and you can't hear it anymore, and that will be a different moment for each of you depending on your hearing and where you're sitting. Turn to somebody sitting near you, and for those of you at home, I'm afraid, or in your office, I'm afraid that this isn't an activity you can do, but turn to someone near you and just taking turns. I'm not doing too much discussing, but allowing each person to speak. Just to, what did you notice when we did that activity? Sharing with each other. Yes. So STEM is what did I notice, what did I experience?
Calm. Nice. Just slow down.
I didn't hear you, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just repeating that the sentence STEM was what do I notice, what did I experience? I think I heard a little weekend talking. So is there anyone who would like to share to the whole group something that they noticed or experienced in doing that activity?
Go, Carla.
Thank you.
Hey, Carla. Hello.
Thank everybody.
I'm aware that I've been racing all morning, trying to get things going, and it's like a welcome invitation. It feels so welcoming to be able to sit, settle, and, you know, breathe. So, thank you. This was a very nice exercise, so thank you for that. It's a kind of a welcome old friend. So I have a sitting practice, so being able to come back to think, okay, just quiet. It was very nice. Nice way to start.
Yes.
We thought you had a particularly good chime. Because it vibrated out. For a while, it's a very, very pleasant sound.
You can get it at Amazon.com. Along with everything else in the world. Any other notices? Yes.
I was just very aware of how much tension and I hold in my neck and my shoulders.
Yes. Anyone else have an experience of tension in their neck or shoulders,
Oh, yeah.
either now or another time? Yes.
I noticed the baby.
Uh-huh.
And my first thought was, what's that? And then I thought, and then it kind of shifted to, well, what a calming noise, and, you know, to think of a mother and a child, it just kind of shifted for me.
And those of us who've been parents know that in a moment that could change to a not so calming noise, but it's lovely to have that Gabriel with us. Yes. So, I'm sorry, your name is?
Oh, hi, I'm Carla.
Carla.
Sorry, I came late.
So, Carla, this is a practice that is a transition practice. We call it a pause practice, and in fact, I'm going to ask people to pass these around. If you would just put a few on each table. I have little cards to take away that we probably did it for maybe 2 minutes. You could do it for just the length of 3 deep breaths and get some benefit from it. But the importance of stopping in a transition and settling and getting present to what this experience is going to be, as opposed to the experience you just came from, it's this little pause, this little break. And as busy as all of us are, there probably is time for 3 breaths, and there may, if not, there's time for 1. And what's important is the depth of the breath, taking that breath deep into your belly, because it actually has a physiological effect. And I'm not a scientist, and some of you probably know far more about this than I do, so I just want to be a disclaimer. But what I've heard from my scientist colleagues is it activates what's called the vagus nerve, which is a major part of our nervous system, and that in turn activates our parasympathetic nervous system. And that is the part of our nervous system that is the antidote to our fight or flight reaction. So in that moment of breathing deeply, you are actually bringing in the calming capacity of your own body to re-regulate after it's been stressed. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But these pause cards, it's just very simple. You stop and you breathe and you notice. And then you go on. So at PassageWorks Institute and in as many places as I feel it's safe to do, I will ask people to do this little exercise before we start a meeting. on one level, it's a radical act. On another level, it's a kind of simple human act. Could we settle down, breathe, and then begin anew? And it's always available to us. So if you take nothing away from this meeting other than this pause card, and if you wanted to take more, as many as there are, you feel free to take, and it's not going to change the world, but we're printing many of them to just send out into the universe. So how many of you know the term mindfulness? A lot of you. How many of you have actually engaged at some point in time with a practice that was regular about mindfulness? So still a lot of you, okay? And how many have a current mindfulness practice? Okay. So I want to try not to bring coals to Newcastle and talk to you about things you already know, but it's sort of for the wider audience, and we can go in a lot of different directions, and we can do a lot of practices. So, but to begin at the beginning, I wanted to define mindfulness, and I gave you a copy of slides, and oops, I have to do it this way. So in the world of education and in a lot of the world where mindfulness is coming into being, the person we refer to most is Jon Kabat-Zinn. And because he is the sort of father of a tradition of bringing practices that have their roots in the Eastern religious and traditions, but he found a way to turn them into a strictly secular practice, informed by Eastern roots, but not carrying any of the notions that this is a religious practice in any way. And does anyone know the work of Jon Kabat-Zinn? Okay. So, for those of you who don't, he I think has a PhD in biology or some version of biology, and he was working at the University of Massachusetts at Worcester Medical Center over 30 years ago, and he had come back from some personal work in India and found the practices that he'd learned there very restorative and helpful, and he thought that they could be helpful to sick people. And he asked the medical staff at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center at Worcester if he could work with the patients that they had nothing more to offer. The patients with chronic pain that couldn't be alleviated, the patients who had chronic diseases that weren't going to get better, the patients that the doctors were heartbroken over but couldn't help. And he created a program called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, which is the gold standard of mindfulness programs, and it has been researched at length. And this is one of the definitions he uses to talk about mindfulness, that it is a specific way to pay attention to anything. So we could pay attention, and in our little exercise, we paid attention to our thoughts at one moment. I asked you to notice what was happening with your thoughts. I asked you to notice what was happening with your body, with your emotions. It could be a sensory experience, and we're going to have that shortly. You could be paying attention to the food you're eating, and we're going to do that collectively soon. So it's a way of paying attention, and what is that specific way? And it has 4 components, that we do it on purpose, that we're making a conscious choice to cultivate attention and to bring this natural capacity that we have. Even if we have challenges with attention, virtually all of us, I'm sure there are probably some exceptions, but virtually all of us in the normal range of behavior can pay attention for some amount of time to something. So we're not teaching somebody something that they can't do or that they have to learn from scratch. We're cultivating something that is there. But we do it on purpose. We bring this attention to one of these phenomena on purpose. And what we're trying to do, and this is the challenge, is to be in the present moment, to be paying attention to what is happening now, and now, and now. How many of you, there are 2 kinds of people in the world, kinds of people who believe there's 2 kinds of people and kinds of people who don't, but are part of my club, that we are always planning for the thing that's going to happen next. As somebody I met recently said, I could plan anything. I could be planning lunch, I could be planning my trip to the bathroom, I could be planning anything. And then there are other people who think about what happened in the past and sort of reflect, and sometimes, as you know from clients, they ruminate, but are sort of more, their attention is in the back. Anyone in the room who sort of pays more attention to the back? So the rest of you are all present in the moment. I should leave right now. No. Mindfulness is a practice of trying to be with what's happening right now. And there are times to plan, and there are times to reflect. So everything about mindfulness is not that it is better than whatever else we do, but that it adds to what we do and expands our human repertoire and brings in a more whole part of living when sometimes we get too channelized. So here's an interesting part of mindfulness, is that we are also cultivating the capacity to not judge. I won't even ask you to raise your hands, but has anyone had a thought about